Call a special meeting of the Apache Junction City Council to order. We're going to have a pledge, but no prayer. The pledge will be led by Councilmember Struble.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mayor Surtee,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Councilmember Barker,
Here.
Councilmember Evans,
Here.
Councilmember Rizzi,
Present.
Councilmember Schroeder,
Here.
Councilmember Struble.
Here.
You have a quorum, Your Honor.
Presentation, discussion, and consideration for resolution number 20-23, a resolution of the Mayor and City Council of the City of Apache Junction, Arizona, approving a small business assistant grant program in the City of Apache Junction and declaring an emergency for grant funding recently made available through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, signed into law by President Trump on March 27th, 2020. Before I hand it over to Matt and Janine, we all received a very well-crafted letter from AJPOA, and it put things into perspective for myself anyway. This is the last discussion we had, and a lot of these discussions and decisions we make are very difficult about the possible step increases for all of staff. And it's pretty apparent that this CARES Act, one of the main things written in there is for public safety. So before we're done, I want to kind of have an understanding that when we do the step increases, that this is where the step increase for the police department should come from. And then hopefully, Bryant, you can come up with out of our regular budget when we talk about this in August for the rest of staff. So just rest assured, we are working on that, and that is what we intend to do. So,
Your Honor, it is in the budget, and that availability is there, and it's always been planned. And we have direction from you to come back on a meeting in August to receive direction from staff. We would love to know as soon as possible, also from a finance perspective, to get preparing, if you would be interested in doing retro through the first full pay period in July, as it was planned in the budget.
okay. So with that, we'll go to Matt and Janine.
And Mr. Mayor, I'll kick this off. Tonight's topic is specifically about the Small Business Assistance Program, as was part of our discussion with the City Council last Monday night. You asked us to get a program put together quickly, and based on the feedback we received from you last Monday night, as well as what we've learned from other communities that have implemented similar things. As a reminder, $4.8 million was our allotment that we have received now from the Arizona CARES Fund that was distributed to the state, and they created a process for the reimbursement of our public safety personnel costs to receive that funding. That fulfills the requirements of the CARES Act, per the federal requirements that the state has to give the feds. So we discussed a lot of the background materials with you on those dates listed on the presentation. Those presentations are actually attached to this budget item as well, just for the public's use or for your use. One of the many things we discussed last time as we walked through the different things that we've seen other communities do. Some of that is to support their reserves and make sure their operations can go on at the local government level, specifically public safety. And then also this community investment, different options that different communities have done. And tonight, the topic at hand is the Business Assistance Program. I'm going to invite Janine up to walk you through the resolution and the program as we took your feedback, like we explained, and created this program. So, Janine.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, Mayor, members of the Council. Janine Solly, Economic Development Director. As Matt said at your July 6th meeting, we shared some details of programs that we started to see emerging throughout the municipalities for business assistance programs. And we shared with you some of the eligible expenses that we're seeing in these programs. We discussed several of the administrative options that these communities were using. And we took all of that information We listened to what you had to say that evening, and tonight we're here to bring you what we think we heard you say that you would like to see in a local program here. So for your consideration tonight is Resolution 20-23 as a recommended program, and we will walk through what that resolution looks like. So the recommended program is based on 25% of the city's overall allocation of the $4.8 million that Matt referenced, and that would be made available to Apache Junction businesses, and that amount would equal just over $1.2 million. The program we're proposing is based on expense reimbursement for costs that have already been incurred by the business, and it would allow up to $10,000 per business. They could use that for rent, utilities, or cost of personal protective equipment, often referred to as PPE, that they had been required to purchase or meet to satisfy safety measures that were implemented, such as special signage for distancing, plexiglass partitions that may have needed to be placed, etc. Again, the total maximum grant per business in any combination of these expenses would be a maximum of $10,000 as proposed. To be eligible, the recommended criteria includes all of the following there. The business is for profit. The business is located within the jurisdiction of Apache Junction and is a commercially zoned property. The business had a valid business license as of March 1st. They still have a current license and they are still in business. The business cannot be a company-owned franchise, and the business needs to be able to document that their sales and income have decreased or been negatively impacted by at least 25% due to COVID. If you approve this program tonight, we would be eligible businesses in Apache Junction could start applying as early as next week, and the grant, as we're proposing, would remain open for 5 weeks or until all of the funding is exhausted, whichever comes first. As drafted, the program is on a first-come, first-served basis right now, so we would encourage applicants to apply early. It will also require supporting documentation in addition to the application that would include bills and receipts of any of the qualifying expenses that they incurred, as well as a few just standard business documents such as a W-9, etc., and their business license. We have included also a fairly standard list of ineligible businesses for the program. They would not be able to participate in the grant. Those are outlined in the application itself, and they're also included in your Exhibit A that is included as part of the resolution. I did provide for you a hard copy of what was posted to the internet, resolution and Exhibit A, but I need to point out 2 minor changes that were made since posting last week. In Exhibit A on page 1, there was a first bullet under the discussion section. We added the word mortgage. So if someone owns their building, mortgage would be eligible as well as just someone who's renting. And that actually was included in another part of the document. It just got missed in this first section. And then also on page 4 of attachment A, Exhibit A, about 2/3 of the way down, we referenced personal protective equipment. I inadvertently listed it as PPP instead of PPE. A lot of PPP on the brain lately, so that's been corrected. Other than that, everything else remains the same. We propose to administer this program in-house, which would include providing program assistance to any business that wanted to apply, receiving and reviewing the applications for completeness and making sure they have all of the adequate support documentation. We would process all of the approved payments and keep all the records of the granted or denied applications, as well as all the documentation. And of course, a portion of that would be reporting back to you on results. We'll have applications available for business as it's proposed online, and hard paper copies at City Hall at the front desk in Economic Development. As it's proposed also, the program suggests a city manager appointed staff review committee be established as the group that would review the applications that come in. And we'd also have a goal of 10 calendar days to turn around the receipt of the application and getting the payment out to the business. Should an applicant be denied, there is a built-in process, appeal process that would be the city manager. He would be the ultimate authority on the appeal. And of course, we would keep you abreast, potentially with weekly updates or at council meetings, whatever your preference would be. So those are the basic components. We're encouraging your feedback and your suggestions at this time.
Any questions or discussion? Krista?
If a business, we've gotten a list of some of the businesses that have received assistance. If a business has already received some kind of assistance through other mechanisms, will they still qualify for this? Or will they be considered, will they kind of be pushed back to, the end of the line so that businesses that haven't received anything can come first?
That's a great question. Because we're doing first come, first serve, it's difficult to delay them. I suppose we could kind of let them know by a certain date if we haven't expended all of the funds. But we are not using the PPP receipt of funds or idle loans or whatever as a disqualifier for the program, except for the communities that receive those funds straight from the feds. They were required to say if you receive PPP or some other kind of funding, you can't be eligible for this. But in the other local programs that we've seen, that has not been a qualifier. So, and I'll give you an example in Fountain Hills. They actually put that in initially as a disqualifier, and they were getting so few applications that they removed that. And I've also heard from some who, for the folks that applied for PPP early, not knowing how long this was going to impact their business, may have applied for a small amount, so they may have gotten a PPP loan for a couple $1,000s, and 3 months later here, it really wasn't enough. So you can certainly change that, but we did not include that as a qualifier, a disqualifier.
Did you get contacted this week by businesses?
I did not.
Okay. I have another question. What if we hardly get any requests at all, which leaves us with a large surplus of this at the end? Bryant, Matt, since this is intended for public safety, could that then go towards public safety?
Matt, would you think that they could put that in the motion tonight?
Yeah.
Or would we just bring it back? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that could
we
be in
can
a,
bring it back for a future discussion if you decide.
but I would recommend putting it in the motion tonight. Let's get it
Because I
done.
mean, with budgets, if you got a $1,000 budget, it's easy to go down to the dollar. When you're talking this much, when we don't know how much of a, reception will be, we may be well over or well under, and if we're well under, then it's gonna be a pleasant task to then divvy that up.
Correct.
And we have to use it by when? By the first of the year?
I don't think there's any,
There's no
No date.
stipulation. Only those that receive the direct allotment from the federal government, like those 500,000 population above, have that requirement. Other than
Okay.
that, we don't have to report back to the state. We don't have to do any of that.
All right, they're not gonna take it from us.
No.
nope.
Okay.
If I might, Mr. Mayor, address Councilmember Rizzi's question that Janine just answered. That's just what we saw. That's why we put it in that way. We saw that in other communities. It's totally your policy as a council if you wanted to remove that stipulation or otherwise. Janine alluded to that, but I just want to make sure that if you wanted that stipulation there, if they received other funding, they're not eligible, it's totally up to the council. We're basing it off on what we saw out there.
I'm not sure what that would look like, but it would be kind of be nice. It's like the person that wins the lottery more than once, or a rich person. It's like, let's help the people that haven't had any help before we start helping people that already have received some help. But I get why we have a time frame
Well,
to
and
turn around.
We do have the question on the application, did you receive it? What type of funds have you received? What's the amount?
Yeah,
So the question is there if you wanted to use it.
More questions or discussion?
I have two questions. One, so we give somebody their $10,000 and 2 months from now, they go out of business. do we have any recourse if someone kind of basically takes the money and runs?
Great question, and the answer to that is no, not as currently written. The only example in any of the community's programs that I've seen that had any kind of clawback to it was in the city of Maricopa, where if you applied for funds for a certain use and you couldn't provide documentation that you used it for that purpose, you would then owe the city back those funds. Aside from that, there hasn't been, that I've seen, any requirement for a period of time to stay in business. Our application is written just as you need to be in business at the time you apply for the funds.
And there'd be documentation required of, it says what it can be used for, so I'm assuming we would have to require documentation to know that the money was used for that, so whether they went out of business or not might be irrelevant if it went to help get, I mean,
Well, it says that I will provide requested performance data related to the use of the funds. So it seems like that could be the mechanism that could be used, because you would be the first to know that somebody closed their doors, and you could go to them and say, you signed this and this is what it says, so I need the documentation. That would answer that question, would it not?
Yes, if I'm understanding the question correctly, though, we won't issue a check until we have adequate documentation that they've incurred those funds. I think we're asking that kind of boilerplate, and on the application there is, if we were to require some additional information that wasn't necessarily asked for up front,
Okay.
we would
I
have
see.
the ability to request that from
So in order to have some kind of, what did you call that, clawback?
clawback.
That's a really cool phrase. I've never heard that before. In order to have some kind of a clawback, we'd have to amend it to include that. And how would something like that be worded? Come on, Janine, you can do this.
I have heard discussions in other communities when they've talked about this, and the somewhat difficulty of requiring a business to remain open to
Right.
be eligible for funds. Joel says, though, it's city funding, so we can ask, I don't know how we would word it, but he has indicated to me that we could add that in.
Yeah, because it's city funds that could certainly be used for other things that are the result of the COVID virus. And if somebody were to receive funds, and hopefully this wouldn't happen, but if it happened, and then they closed their doors and walked away with it, that's, citizens' money that's going into somebody's pocket, which is not the intent of those funds.
how could that happen if we're requiring the documentation prior to giving the funding? I mean, here's the scenario that I could see happening. Hopefully it won't. A business is struggling, they get a small amount, and they pay things, and we're still in a slowdown, and I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 months from now, they do end up closing. But if they use the funds for what they were supposed to be used for, and they provided the documentation,
That's the end of that.
Yeah.
I agree.
then what,
I agree.
Yeah, 'cause so what we're asking for is, we're gonna get copies of their rent invoices or
Lease.
documentation from the company there they bought the PPEs, or whatever it might be that satisfies our documentation. As a small business owner, what's happened is we're going into our savings to buy these things, pay payroll, pay rent, whatever it is. And so as long as the small business owner can provide those invoices, those things that said we did spend the money, I would suggest either a canceled check or a bank statement that says the money actually did come out of the bank account. But even if when they do get the money, they'll just replenish their savings, because that's what they use. So it would be pretty tough. And, a business owner, God forbid, they could get the money on August 4th and die on August 5th.
Yeah.
They're gonna close the bill, but they got it.
Still have bills to pay.
Yeah, they still have bills to pay.
Regardless.
Yeah.
That's a
so-
great point, and I think the The reality is we don't know how long it's going to be
Right.
before we completely
Right.
recover from this, so
And-
that's an unknown as
And
well.
in reality too, after hearing all of this, what I'm seeing is we're asking for documentation of past bills incurred. So we're not concerned if they close their door the next day because they have paid their past bills. I got it. Thank you.
Wanted to maybe use the money for the
Sometimes it takes a while.
But yeah, it's apparent we're being diligent with this. We're not just gonna throw it out. So,
So
Gail?
the second question is, because this is specifically for-profit businesses. Okay.
I'm sorry, for what business?
It's for-profit businesses,
As written.
because the nonprofits got separate funding. But is this a duplication of the funding that the nonprofits received? Did they get rent and utilities as well? Because,
I don't believe that the funds that went to some of the nonprofits were earmarked for particular types of
They weren't.
expenses.
expenses
The
I
ones-
think it was
Yeah.
just for the nonprofits'
Right.
use.
for running.
And in some,
for
yeah,
keeping the services going.
correct.
Which are under more stress now than ever. So I just wanted to know how everybody else felt about excluding the nonprofits from this same funding, because from what I had read, it was more for the services and the items that they're handing out, but not specifically for their rent, because the food bank doesn't pay rent, but Genesis pays rent, and so on. So I didn't know how anybody else felt about including the nonprofits.
I think you've got a problem with nonprofits because of so many different types of nonprofits. So many different funding mechanisms that go into each of the different types.
And I agree with that, but this is specifically for rent and utilities. It's kind of earmarked just for that, so in order for them to continue their services that they're providing,
Understood.
I would like it to be included.
Are any other communities doing nonprofits?
Two are of the examples that we have, Fountain Hills and Maricopa County.
The whole
And actually, I
county.
should say the city of Maricopa, it depends. Because they're not doing a first come, first serve, they're having everybody submit and then basing it on need.
Oh, wow.
They're a little bit
Oh,
more,
wow. That'll be a process.
so it varies.
I don't have a problem with adding nonprofits. It's a first come, first serve, so,
Yeah.
get your tail down there and make out the application and see what happens.
What's the turnaround time? You said that there's no first come, first serve, that they're actually screening and deciding. What's the turnaround time for those?
In Maricopa?
For the
So
funding?
they were collecting all of the applications, and then they were taking it to the council on the 16th. And then the city council, they were gonna have a recommending body make, recommendations on this person should get this much and back, and have the city council make the final decision.
Kind of like our Health and Human Services Board does?
Mm-hmm.
So if we did nonprofits, the question is, would we consider the nonprofits that have received funding from the city already through Health and Human Services over maybe nonprofits that haven't received any of that type of funding?
Well, and
Tough call.
And I think part of that has to do with what the nonprofits apply for through Health and Human Services aren't really earmarked for
For
rent
rent
and
or
utilities.
utilities, right.
It's the other
They were
services that they provide, yes.
Yeah, all of them were earmarked
That's
for
why I kept
programs.
going back and forth with it, and, because this is specifically for rent and utilities.
I'm going to make a comment on concerning this. I think, because the nonprofits have been getting, I'll say, additional funding that's been designated to assist them on it. If we end up having money left over, then maybe we can look into including them into it. But right now, it's designed to assist some of the small businesses of our community and assist them through this I call it wonderful period of time, and I say very sarcastically, wonderful.
It's a
But-
fascinating period of time.
All right, fascinating period of time.
But Vice Mayor, the small businesses, going on the same track that you are, the small businesses also had a loan, which there is still money available for small businesses through PPP. So both small businesses and nonprofits have had more or less equal opportunity to get funding.
Matt and Brian, is there some way we can maybe relook at this again in 3 months to see how it's working? And while this is not being used, maybe include some other folks? Is that possible?
Certainly can bring it back and keep you posted as we go, and weekly reports on, depending how you do the motion. If you wanted to start out a certain way and then bring back nonprofits, we can do that too. Yep, it's totally up to you.
And as Janine mentioned in the presentation, we'll give you weekly updates of applications and approvals
How
and,
does
you know, so
everybody-
you'll know how it went by the end of August anyway.
How does everybody think about what I just said then about,
Well, then that takes away from your comment earlier where you said surplus funds should go to public safety.
yeah,
So if we waited to add nonprofits, seeing if we had a surplus, then we'd have to move that down the line.
yeah.
It seems to me we should just add them now and be done with it.
And one of the benefits of doing it now and being done, then you include it, and then we keep you posted as you go. And if there's in the motion something that says the rest go to public safety, then we have your direction and we move forward.
Janine, do you know how many total nonprofits we have in the city?
Oh, I got a list from the city clerk's office. Are there 90-some?
90.
But there
Eighty-
again, we would have, I
83.
mean, they have
Yeah.
to have some,
Service.
well, they, not just service, but they have to have some, obviously, they'll be applying for rent, so they're gonna have a building and such, so, yeah, that's just kind of.
And I think some are more prone to community service than others.
Yeah.
Just by their function and, you know, the nature of what they do, so.
And are you talking all 501c3s, or are you talking the
Right,
other?
and that was a list of all. It wasn't broken down.
Right, so you've got the Elks, you've got the lodges, you've got
Right.
all those.
And therein was my problem when we
Right.
added all
Yeah.
of those in there. That became my problem with
Yeah.
the word nonprofits.
No, we gotta pare that down if we're gonna do that.
Yeah.
So what would you call it, service-oriented nonprofits, or what
Well, we-
specifically would you call it? Would you define what service they're providing, like food or shelter, or, I mean, what?
Well,
How would
there's,
you-
I'm sorry. There, in the, in the IRS regulations, when you're setting up your nonprofit and you do your 1023 or 1023 easy to set that up, as opposed to get the designation, you have to apply for the designation that you want, whether you're gonna be a 501c3. There's about, actually, I don't know, 10 or 15 designations that you can apply for on your 1023. And they have various, some are just trusts, some are service organizations, some are true, I about said true. Some are just nonprofits that go out some are not, some are designated to do things like, community health centers, things like that, where they do fee for service. They contract with the government, state, county, federal, whatever it is, to do just fee for service. And then there's the other, I don't want to use true, but what we think of as nonprofits, where they go out and get donations to provide a service to the community, the groups of people, that type of stuff. So there are designations within the IRS regulations that I think we could pare that down by without designating service, because most nonprofits, if we call it, do some kind of a service.
It looks like Joel and Bryant just came up with some answers over here.
That wasn't what I was asking.
Well, you probably don't want these comments, but the title says Small Business Assistant Grant Program. There's no whereas clause for nonprofits, because last time we met, you said no nonprofits. So we have to change the resolution a little bit. I would recommend that if you're gonna do nonprofits, let's do a separate resolution for them and bring it back.
That would give us time to get a designation.
I think the city manager has a different opinion.
disagree.
Is that gonna delay everything? I don't wanna delay anything.
But it wouldn't delay this. If you
I
vote
mean,
on
I
this
would
tonight,
prefer,
no.
let's get this done. I mean,
Yes.
we've been talking about this.
You can vote on this one tonight, but Well, once again, the resolution is not accurate.
The whole reason for having this special meeting is to speed it up and not
Sure.
drag it out
What
and out
about
and out.
having an application, a separate application, you know, separate the small businesses from the nonprofits so they're not competing for the funds?
You can do that.
I mean, what about that idea? If you guys want the nonprofits involved, set aside some of the funding specifically for nonprofits so the businesses aren't competing with them. What would be the difference aside from it would be a little bit of extra time, but
And money.
It would have to be part of the 1.2 million.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree.
Yeah.
well, it already is. It's just that you're
We'd have to-
separating them out so that they're not
It'd
necessarily
have to be
competing.
pulled out.
So what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is we cannot amend this to include nonprofits.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, if you want to do that in your motion. So you would amend the title to add nonprofits. That's number one. Number two, you'd come up with one whereas clause that says, nonprofits are also integral to the city community, so that it's covered, and then you're good.
Got that, Robin?
Got that?
And also, number three, there'd be a separate application process if you still want to do that. And it would be part of the,
Does that have to be part of a motion?
it should be. And then we could redo the resolution and have that signed tomorrow by the mayor.
Brian, could we hear about your disagreement?
I just feel that the new amendment and idea Joel just had is great. And then I would also like to add, yeah, keeps this moving, and include, an idea, and then you guys have talked about, which is the idea of a motion so that staff would know that any excess after those
Goes to PD.
would go to public safety.
Yeah,
Okay.
got it.
All right, it sounds like we're getting real close.
So I got a question, and one of the criteria is that and I understand company-owned, I mean, we're not gonna pay Fry's or Walmart or, any of these big places or anything like this, but you mentioned franchises, and there's different franchises. McDonald's is a franchise, but like my accounting and tax practice, I'm a franchise, but all I basically do is pay royalties, and I get some assistance when I need it. But I'm a standalone franchise, and I'm just I'm visualizing at the trail, and I'm thinking of who might be a franchise on there. I don't know, can I name names? Little Caesars,
Taco
Jiffy
Bell.
Lube.
Corporate-owned franchises.
So if it's independently owned and operated, then they would be eligible.
Okay,
It's
so-
just if it's a corporate store.
Do we need to change the wording because there are does you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How would we change
I
the
think
wording?
it's in there, isn't it?
in
That
It says
It says
franchises.
Company owned.
Corporate
it
owned.
says, yeah,
Corporate owned.
for instance, Taco Bell and
So it's
Little Caesars are both.
corporate owned, well, they're not anyway, okay.
I think it's covered.
So if they're independently owned and operated, they
Okay, I just want to make sure, because
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to be left out who was out there,
Right, and that
Picking-
is our intent, right.
okay. They've been killing themselves for 20 years, and because,
Joel, grab your mic so everybody can hear. Grab your mic and turn it, yeah.
Yeah. Exhibit A, bullet point, number 3 in the last program criteria, are not a company-owned franchise. I think that's what you're getting at, Mr. Struble, is that correct?
right, and I guess franchise is a funny word, because if you're company-owned, it's, anyway. Okay, I just want to make sure
Thank
those
you.
small business owners are still covered, so.
Okay, how close are we to this motion?
Your Honor,
Got it if
Yes,
you want.
Robert?
I might throw it back a few years. So what about things like Salvation Army, United Way? Can they apply?
They're not
If I add nonprofits.
Okay,
yes.
so now it would make sense that places like that would have better resources to have people work on these applications for them. So are we going to start looking at 90% applications of nonprofits because they have people that can take the time to do that instead of your mom and pop who are busy running their business?
You don't work for any nonprofit, I can tell.
Well-
They don't have a staff to do that most of
Well,
them.
yeah, they just have
Some do,
volunteers.
but very few.
When you put a dollar sign on it, believe you me, they'll fill out an application. So I just wonder, is that, when we came up with this amount of money per business, is that a certain amount of applications? Is that like, we're going up to X amount of applications, or you have the month and first come, first serve, and come the end of the month, it's over?
So we do have some estimates. So based on the 25% and a $10,000 maximum, if every business who applied wanted the maximum, you could help 122 businesses. Now, not everyone is going to apply, presumably for the whole 10,000. So if it was about 7,500, you could help about 162 businesses. We came up with the 10,000. That seemed to be a number that was pretty standard out there. Couple a little more, couple a little less. So we thought that was probably a good place to start, and a good number of businesses that you could help with those funds and or nonprofits if we go that route. So if everybody did 5,000 on average, you could help 244 businesses.
Okay. So I believe that if this were to go to open it up a free-for-all for nonprofits and everything, we would get overwhelmed with nonprofit applications that would take over. So, what's that? You don't agree? Well, that's just my own personal opinion. So, I mean, I wouldn't, see, the only way to really know that is to let it happen and see what happens.
Or to separate them.
So you can separate them, I suppose. I mean, I don't,
Got a separate application that helps.
Can you said there's 90 in the city, but how many actually have brick and mortar?
Well, and I haven't done that analysis yet. So, but in comparison for that, so 90 nonprofits in the city, and while we have more businesses than this, we're estimating about 860 storefront businesses. So 90 of nonprofits, versus 860 for storefront business.
And the nonprofits would still have to be in commercially zoned.
Storefronts.
That would be up to you,
No, I'm just
No,
saying.
but yes.
that we currently
For the
have that
nonprofit
in
definition, you
district.
could just say as defined by the Federal CARES Act, because they had a whole section on 501c3.
And I know there's different type of nonprofits, and some of which were able to apply for PPP monies, and some were not. I know like 501c6s were not able to, I think there were only two, 501c3s and 501c12s or something, were the only ones able to apply for PPP. So there may actually be other nonprofits that are outside of those categories that weren't able to apply for any of the federal funds,
And
just
this
as a
is-
side note.
These would be the same rules, just renting utilities. We're not
So-
talking about anything else.
right, so I mean, if separate application process, I understand that, but it's still first come, first serve. It's still, whether it's a separate application or not, is that right? I mean, it's just, here you go.
As it is written, yes.
Yeah.
So how would it be written any different, how a separate application would make an effect?
Well, at least you'd know how many nonprofits there were.
Well, I
They're
mean,
separate.
well, I guess so, but I mean, if you get one that says Mickey D's on the application, you're pretty sure that's not a nonprofit. So,
What I was
I don't
suggesting
know.
is what I meant it was to, with the separate application process, was to divvy those funds up differently. Say, we're gonna have this percentage or this amount for nonprofits and set aside this amount for small businesses, if we're gonna include the nonprofits. So that, and then if you're gonna have a first come, first serve,
So, Your Honor, I think.
I have a little bit of a problem with the nonprofits competing with the small businesses in this community.
yeah, like
And I-
take the chamber, for example.
I
They
have
have
a problem with
Rent,
that.
and they have utilities.
So am I hearing it saying, so we have one for 25%, of the 25%, you'd have 1.2 million, you're saying setting aside in the motion 200,000 for nonprofits and one, like something, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to get at,
I'd be
not to exceed per each
Yeah,
one,
so
but
the
not go
first-
more than 1.2.
If we're gonna include the nonprofits, I would prefer to do it that way.
Well, that's, yeah, that, first come, first serve on
Is
both
that
of
readable
those.
into this or not? We're getting further,
Okay.
Further
tell me
away.
Again, I've kept up with you so far.
okay.
So we have 1.2 million that's being designated to the
Right.
small businesses,
And
and
where-
now we're wanting to include in that 1.2 million, another how many nonprofits that the small businesses are gonna be.
So does that take the
Competing
the small businesses down to 800,000?
But you set the cap on small business and also for the nonprofits.
And then I have another question.
Go ahead.
The whole elephant in the room was that this funding was supposed to be for law enforcement. What percentage specifically was gonna be designated for that? Where are they coming into this equation? I get that the small businesses are important and we're trying to, where do they fit into this?
This one tonight was just for this.
So
So
it-
that's 25% that would be gone. We'd have 75% left to talk about at another time.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
caution in the
12.5%.
motion that if
What's
we
that?
don't use it
12.5%.
all, it goes back.
Bust it down.
So,
Maximum of 5,000. Let everybody apply.
so we can, out of the 1.2, we can exclude X number of dollars to be used for nonprofits or applied to nonprofits that make application.
Apply to.
Yeah,
You put the caps on both categories.
right.
That should be in the motion.
I think that's the only way I can support it, if we're gonna include nonprofits, because they weren't initially included, and it's nothing against the nonprofits, they do amazing work in the community. But I'd rather divvy it out, separate it out, so that they're not competing dollar for dollar with the small businesses. Just give them an amount and cap it, and the same with the small businesses.
And are you saying you also want to designate tonight the other portion, the 75% towards
No.
revenue reserve or city of Apache Junction or public safety?
I think we need to talk about that at a later date.
I thought it was gonna be part of the whole conversation tonight, but
This is just says business assistance. If we were to designate a portion for nonprofits, what would that portion be, please?
I don't have a number, but I don't.
25%?
25% of the 25%?
Let's,
25% of the 1.2,
So you want the majority of it to
That
go
would-
towards small businesses? and-
yes.
that would be $300,000 to go to nonprofits.
Well,
I'm just,
We don't even know how
We
many
don't
that is.
how many brick or building, nonprofits with buildings are in that list.
There's no way to,
$200,000 with a cap of 5,000 apiece. First come, first served. Nonprofits.
there's no way to do it like
That'd work.
Titanic lifeboats. Women and children first, meaning the businesses first. And then if there's room later,
But you've already designated the surplus for public safety.
Yep.
So you
So
can
I
take that
think the
off.
way you said it, Robin, it works for me.
200,000 with a cap of 5,000
5,000.
each. So that would
So that
mean
would be
For the nonprofit?
for the nonprofits.
40 nonprofits.
up to 40 nonprofits. That's a significant number. That's a
Yeah.
good,
Significant number. I don't
Yeah.
think we have that many.
I
brick
don't
and
either.
mortar brick
I mean, you have very active, 12 to 20,
Maybe.
something like
yeah,
that.
it feels like about 10 to me.
So should the cap be raised then?
Well, I mean, okay. the
Instead
non-
of 5 to 75?
The nonprofits, if they're renting, and if they're renting in Apache Junction, they're paying the same, well,
Yeah.
they could be paying the
They
same
are.
rent unless the landlord is benevolent,
Mm-hmm.
as a business. And,
Absolutely.
and, you know, I only know what I pay in Apache Junction. I don't know, I'm assuming that it's pretty close to what everybody else is paying, which $10,000 is 3 to 4 months of rent. And if the nonprofits are paying the same thing, you know, they could use the 10,000. And at 200,000, that would be only 20, which I really don't know if we have 20 brick and mortar
Yeah.
nonprofits.
Okay.
in
That would-
Apache.
I'll put it at that.
So are you for taxpayer money going to nonprofits now?
I want this
Hey,
on
guys.
record.
Hey, guys. I was gonna ask you the same thing, Mr. Schroeder, but,
He crossed over,
no, I have not crossed over.
not totally.
I'm trying to get
Yeah.
this conversation moving to get this
Okay,
thing
may I
done.
clarify?
Believe me, this is killing me, guys.
Let me
so-
clarify, Jeff. Okay, so what we want is this resolution, plus nonprofits for 200,000 with a $10,000 cap, and then amend, there, blah, 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 and any excess funds from this fund to be placed in the public safety budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that what we're saying?
It
Yes.
sounds like it, yes.
The excess of
Got it.
this program,
This portion of it,
of this portion.
this
Yeah.
portion.
I just want to make sure that that.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're not going, this only deals with this 25% that we're
I
dealing.
understand.
Yeah.
All right, I'm about to call for a motion. Yes?
Just, can you just give it a half a second just to think about it?
Half a second.
Well, maybe half a
I'm
minute,
gonna
About
time
to-
you.
half a minute.
About to get real.
I'm good.
Okay. Your Honor, sir,
Yes.
would you like a motion?
Yes.
That's good. Now let me get my iPad to come back up again, since it took so long.
Mine was dead last night.
Okay, I move that Resolution 20-23, a resolution of the mayor and the city council of the city of Apache Junction approving the implementation of a small business assistance grant program and a nonprofit grant program in the city of Apache Junction and declaring an emergency for grant funding recently made available through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security CARES Act for one-time reimbursement for COVID-19 related impacts be approved with the following amendments: that we add nonprofits for a total of $200,000 with a cap to each of $10,000, that we amend the title to include nonprofits, that we add a whereas clause, that local nonprofits are an integral part of the community and provide services for the community, and that there is a separate application for nonprofits.
Could we clarify that they have a brick and mortar or a storefront in
Meeting the
Apache Junction?
same qualifications as is written for small businesses.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Point of order.
And the remainder?
And the remainder will go to public safety. Thank you.
Point of order, so we designated 200,000 for the nonprofits, and obviously the thing was 200,000, or 1.2 million. And math says that the businesses will, or for-profits will be $1 million. Does that have to be stated in there someplace? I'm just asking.
It's already in
Or-
there.
Or is it just
No.
assumed?
You're good.
Okay.
So carry on, Robin.
Second.
Is it, were you finished?
I was finished.
Okay.
And it's
Okay, we
second.
have a second. Roll call.
Councilmember Schroeder,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wilson,
Yes.
Councilmember Barker,
Yes.
Councilmember Evans,
Yes.
Councilmember Rizzi,
Yes.
Councilmember Struble,
Yes.
Mayor Surtee,
Yes.
unanimous, Your Honor.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, since there's no call to the public or anything, we are adjourned.